Mid-M32, approximately 1500 years after the Horus Heresy, and the Imperial Palace of Terra is about to endure a second siege. There will be no Primarchs this time, no demons or gods, no grand armies or towering titans, but the future of mankind would be no less in the balance. A mere 400 Space Marines arrived to seize the throne world. Among them, Maximus Thane, Imperial Fist, veteran of the Horus Heresy, Chapter Master, Lord Commander of the Imperium, highest of the High Lords, first among the 13 who rule the Imperium of Man. Thane had brought his warriors to humanity's homeworld after 100 years away, to set right perhaps the greatest mistake he had ever made. After the War of the Beast, a cataclysmic struggle against an alliance of monstrously powerful Orc warlords, Maximus Thane had been named Lord Commander of the Imperium, the first Space Marine to ever sit among the High Lords of Terra, and at the head of the table no less. This was no coincidence. Drakan Vagorich, master of the Officio Assassinorum, had seen the need for a strong Lord Commander, and engineered several political situations to make sure Thane's appointment became a certainty. But, as the Master of Assassins had predicted, Thane held no interest in power. He felt he had been created to defend mankind, not rule it. Or perhaps he simply had little patience for the tedium of office, when he could be instead crusading among the stars. So rather than remain on Terra, he appointed the Master of Assassins Lord Protector to rule in his behalf. Maximus quickly left Terra for his grand reconstruction and crusade. The Imperial Fist was confident it wouldn't matter. Drakan had been a staunch ally, and the only member of the Lords of Terra to earn Thane's regard during the War of the Beast. Being first among the voting Senate placed Vagorich in a position of immense power, but it wasn't enough for him. No, the Master of Assassins had utterly lost faith in the 12 other High Lords. The Officio Assassinorum has always existed as a sort of check on the other Ordos of the Imperium, a sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of important men and women as a way to deter corruption or incompetence. Vagorich believed the time had come to let that sword fall. Acting swiftly after Thane's departure, the new Lord Protector deployed his assassins and activated others long since embedded. He would wipe the slate clean and forcibly replace each of the High Lords, either with imposters or new, more easily controlled members. It would be a Senate in name only. For all intents and purposes, Vagorich was crowning himself King of Terra, and by extension, the Imperium of Man. There are few organizations as varied or as terrifying as the Officio Assassinorum. Just so we can all truly appreciate the sheer lethality of the knife in Vagorich's hand, let's do a little dive into the Office of Assassins. Headed by the Master of Assassins, in this case, Drakan Vagorich, the Officio Assassinorum is divided between 7 main temples, also known as clades. One can think of them as schools. While each temple is known for a specific style of wet work, in reality, they represent dozens of philosophies and combat styles. With, one exception, of course. As there are countless kinds of assassination, the Master of Assassins must be able to draw on a plethora of agent types, all of whom have undergone to some degree or another cybernetic and genetic enhancement. As this is not a 4-hour expose into assassin clades, I'll stick to the iconic styles of Imperial Assassin. From Temple Admus, Vagorich can draw ambush blade masters, armed with swords designed in the dark age of technology, inhuman speed, and combination bolter and poison needle sidearms. Also an analytical ability mercilessly drilled into them from a young age. Temple Vindicare gives him access to perhaps the greatest marksman in the galaxy. Armed with the Executioner Rifle, an anti-material weapon able to easily punch through even Space Marine armor, along with their iconic Scout Mask, which allows a Vindicare assassin to see in multiple frequencies and listen in on all but the most secure of enemy communications. The Calexis Temple offers Psyker-immune killers, carrying the Pariah gene and armed with the exotic Animus Speculum, a weapon built into the helmet of the Calexis assassin that charges by ripping the soul out of Psykers, and fires a beam of that same psychic energy to burn out the brain of its target. From the highly secretive Venenum Temple come alchemists and poisoners of rare skill, wielding hooked blades and exotic martial arts when brought into combat. Calidus Temple, offering chemically induced shapeshifters who can not only infiltrate a target location, but replace the very people they assassinate. Wielding strange alien blades that seem to phase through armor, rather than peel it away like a traditional power weapon. From Temple Vanus, the Infocyte hackers, armed with tiny drones capable of patching them into almost any system employed by humanity. And finally, if not the most famous assassin clade, certainly the loudest, from Temple Eversor come near mindless berserkers, pushed to the human limit by chemical and cybernetic enhancement, kept frozen until the moment of their deployment, barely kept in control by machines in their brains and extended conditioning. Eversors also famously explode with lethal force when their hearts stop beating, and chemicals that should never mix begin combining. While the High Lords were of course well protected, with access to all these pieces, it was a simple matter indeed for Vagorich to sweep the board clear. Almost no one knew of Vagorich's plan to retire the High Lords, and of those that caught on, only 2 had the means and access to do anything to prevent his ascension. The first, Inquisitor Margarith Vinen of the Ordo Xenos, Vagorich's long-term ally, and the uninterested target of his affections. She caught wind of his plans when the ancient Inquisitor Lord, Veritas, fell to poisoning. Rushing to confront the Master of Assassins, she attempted to dissuade Drakan from this course of action. When he refused, Margarith resolved to kill him, firing her pistol at him point blank. Sadly for the Inquisitor, her target had never been there in the first place. Making his way to Mars to deal with the Fabricator General of the Machine Cult personally, Vinen had been speaking to an advanced hologram of Vagorich. Mustering too little too late, the Inquisitor could only watch in horror as the assassins eliminated their targets all across Terra. The second person standing between Vagorich and becoming a monarch in all but name was his own protege, Assad Wire, codename the hilariously over-the-top Beast Cruel. Despite favoring firearms and his own hands, Cruel was in fact the Venenum Temple's top assassin. Realizing that his latest assignment had been aiding in a coup, Wire made no effort to stop it, but knew he could at least prevent Vagorich from seizing power. Meeting the Master of Assassins in his office after the slaying of the High Lords was complete, Krul was confident not even Drakan could defeat him in a confrontation. So he too attempted to convince his master to abandon this path. He was unsuccessful, and the two assassins quickly came to blows. Inhumanly fast, the two men battled across the office, neither landing anything significant, but Vagorich being forced back constantly. It seemed it was only a matter of time till Beast cornered and slew him. Though losing, Vagorich was satisfied with having finally gotten to test himself against Wire. Uttering a few select command phrases, he turned Beast Krul's cybernetics against him, forcing him immobile and ending the confrontation. The Master of Assassins was regretful that his agent had turned against him. He liked Krul and preferred him as a thinking creature, but failing that, the greatest of Temple Venenum would be handed over to the Eversor Clade. There, he would be turned into a berserk, near-mindless killer, his skills and body pushed even further by new machines and intense chemicals. His mind turned from a fine-edged weapon into the blunt brutality of the Eversor. It was over. Vagorich had done it. The so-called beheading was complete. Drakan had forcibly replaced the Senate of High Lords with his own minions, before doing the same with the Lucifer Blacks, the human protectors of the High Lords, bringing his own assassins into the open to fill the role. It was now his Imperium. Fighting, building, setting up new Space Marine chapters. The rightful protector of the Imperium, Maximus Thane, paid little heed to the throne world. Vagorich was enabling him to achieve his goals, sending the appropriate support, seemingly rebuilding the Imperium. For a time, it seemed the uncrowned king was doing an excellent job. He still regarded Vinand highly, and she did her best to keep him furthering the interests of the Imperium, even as she sent secret message after secret message to Thane, begging him to return. But ruling the Imperium of Man was a heavy burden for 12. Doing so alone was something not even the Emperor had attempted. Over time, cracks began to show in Vagorich. The pressure of his position slowly turning the Master of Assassins into a more self-aggrandizing despot than any of the High Lords he had so despised. Vinand continued to try and keep him, the man who had once been her friend, in check. But as the decades wore on, he ignored her more and more, devoted more time and resources to vanity projects, would forcibly rehome whole populations on a whim, and where once Terra was a hotbed of intrigue, now there were only two voices, that of Drakan Vagorich and that of his executioner's weapons, as any and all dissent was silenced in the most permanent fashion. The Assassin King had become a true dictator, and worse, an incompetent one. The messages sent into the void by Marguerite became more and more desperate as Drakan's schemes grew more and more erratic, till finally the dam burst, and after a century away, Lord Commander of the Imperium, Maximus Thane, turned his gaze to perhaps where it should always have been, the cradle of mankind, the seat of imperial governance, Terra. When Thane and his 400 warriors entered the Sol system, no ships barred their way. As they landed on Terra, no orbital defenses fired upon them. Advancing into the Imperial Palace, no solar auxiliary or Adeptus Arbites barred their way. In fact, the populace of Terra seemed to have some forewarning. As streets in and around the palace stood empty for the first time in over 1,000 years, Vinand and the Inquisition had worked tirelessly to ensure that Thane's way would be clear, and it seemed that the Ordos Vagorich had so ruthlessly defanged were more than happy to stand aside and leave the Assassin King to fend for himself. But of course, Vagorich was not truly alone. He may not have armies. He may not have fleets. He may not be able to field artillery or psychers. But Drakan was still master of the Officio Assassinorum. Not long after they entered the continent-sized palace, Space Marines started to die. Vagorich might have no hope of a traditional defense, but within the labyrinthine palace his assassins could fight a guerrilla war even the Adeptus Astartes would fail to overcome. Using strange technologies and skills honed over lifetimes, the Officio Assassinorum confounded the Space Marine ability to track them, striking out from hidden bolt holes, sniping from secret vantages, all before blending away to hide in some new safe house or among the civilian masses. Unless Thane intended to orbitally bombard the throne world, the assassins could continue fighting like this indefinitely. And while the Temple assassins were occasionally caught out or gunned down, by the time they made it to the Tower of the Officio, roughly half the Marine force had been brought down. An unthinkable casualty rate for the Astartes. 200 Space Marines. A force to conquer solar systems and topple empires. No traditional enemy could have inflicted these losses. But the assassins had no command structure, no infrastructure at all, no homes to defend, and access to the perfect weapons in the perfect hunting ground. For Thane and his Space Marines, things had been reversed. It was now they under siege. The palace had been a grand trap, and there was only one path out of it. Find Vagorich. If the Assassin King could be captured or slain, a new Master of Assassins would take his place. The replacement would then order the temples to stand down, fighting through squads of Calidus, Vindicare, and Calexis assassins. Thane gradually forced his way up the tower to Vagorich's office. Awaiting him there was not the Master of Assassins, but Inquisitor Vinand. Although far older than the last time he had seen her, the Lord Commander still recognized the inquisitorial representative. She warned the Space Marine not to cross the threshold into the office, as it had been rigged to explode once someone left the room. Conversing through the doorway, she explained her own death was a certainty, but regretted it not. This would be penance for failing to stop Vagorich. She also informed Thane where the Master of Assassins could be found. The Angels of Death had come for Drakan. He knew there would be no convincing them. Not this time. Thane wouldn't understand. He wouldn't see that it could all be put right. Vagorich just needed more time. It would all be put right. Vagorich knew he could never truly win a protracted campaign against the galaxy-conquering Space Marines. His assassins were simply not that kind of tool. But he could win a battle, and that would be enough. Once Thane was dealt with, it would be a simple matter to retake control of Terror. Yes, it could be done. Easy, in fact. The Astartes would have no choice but to pursue Vagorich himself. Their arrogance and desire to keep the throne world intact would mean he could pick the battlefield, could lay a trap. Fleeing to Temple Eversor near the North Pole, he violently seized control of the structure and slew all of its attendants, ensuring there would be none who might challenge his authority over the assassins held there. Beginning the early activation rituals to unfreeze the Eversors, Drakan took his place upon a throne in the enormous awakening chamber to make ready for the inevitable. It wasn't a long wait. Mounting up in Thunderhawk gunships, the Imperial Fists and their successor allies made for the Eversor Temple. Destroying its outer defenses with ease, they descended into the dark bowels to find the Master of Assassins. When they did, Vagorich was alone. Thane demanded he surrender, and approximately 200 bolt guns backed up the demand. But Vagorich again would not be swayed. In fact, the way he saw it, the Space Marines were right where he wanted them. The sides of the Great Chamber opened, unleashing the Temple's disciples. 100 Eversor assassins, deployed from their heavily armored stasis pods, filling the chamber with remorseless killers, but also with an obscuring mist that happened to be the exact body temperature of the Eversors. The helmet displays and enhanced vision of the Space Marines had been rendered essentially useless against these practically invisible, lightning-fast berserkers. What the Eversors lacked in coordination, they more than made up for with individual lethality. Their neural gauntlets and power weapons tearing through ceramite armor with ease. Their executioner pistols firing constantly their own penetrating bolt rounds, followed by deadly and venomed needles. Instantly, the Space Marines were forced onto the back foot, forming into retreating firing lines. The Imperial Fists managed to take their own bloody toll on the assassins. But even as they fell, the Eversors exploded, slaying even more Space Marines. Beyond the mist, neither side had any kind of cover. Neither's armor could stop the other's weapons. It was a bloodbath as the two breeds of post-human killer clashed over and over. Eventually, only 3 men were left standing: Thane, Vagorich, and the most brutally successful of the Eversors. As the mist abated, Thane did his utmost to reach the Master of Assassins, but the lone Space Marine was outmatched. The Eversor contemptuously knocked the Lord Commander to the ground. The skull-masked killer loomed over him, but it did not strike. In this, Vagorich's moment of triumph, something had gone wrong. Beast Cruel had slipped the leash. Declaring, "My name is Assad Wire," he fought and overcame the Eversor programming, stepping aside to give Thane access to the Master of Assassins. Vagorich attempted desperately to buy time by trading information. Thane instead ignored him, drew his bolt pistol, and ended the reign of the Assassin King. 200 Space Marines had entered the Eversor Temple. Wounded and abandoned by his savior, one limped out.